Hello, fellow therapists. If you have been Googling how much does it cost to start a private practice, this is the video for you. In this video, I am going to break down each of the costs that you can expect to spend when starting your own private practice. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Kelley Stevens. I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist. I have over a decade of experience in private practice. I have opened 2 of my own successful 6-figure private practices and taught over 2,700 other therapists how to do the same. If you want to take a deeper dive into this material, you can check out my private practice roadmap course. But for right now, let's just get into how much does it cost to open a private practice. Before we dive into a checklist of what you can expect to spend when starting your private practice, I want to say one thing. These are estimates, right? Depending on where you are in the country, depending on whether you open a full-time or a part-time private practice, you may or may not need all of these items. But I really think it's a good idea for therapists to get a general sense going into starting a private practice how much it costs. And the thing that might surprise you by the time you get to the end of this video is that it doesn't cost as much to open a private practice as it does to open some other businesses. Because I want you to think about it this way. You can have a private practice from home. You could do telehealth. You could rent an office part-time. You need a chair, you need malpractice insurance and some other things that I'm going to get into. But if you were opening, let's say, a McDonald's or an amusement park, right? You would need a lot more upfront cost. But as a therapist, the point of entry in terms of cost for opening a private practice might not be as bad as you think. Also, if you want to find all of these costs written out in a checklist rather than watching them in a video, you can go ahead and click below and there is my private practice startup cost worksheet. You can just download it and print it. I'll link it below. All right, let's get into what you need to open a private practice. The very first thing you're gonna need is an office space. Now, some therapists choose to not have an office at all and just do telehealth. If that's the case, you're still going to need some office supplies. You're gonna need a chair, you're gonna need a quiet room to work in, right? You're gonna need to make sure that you have a really good webcam. But for the most part, if you are doing a telehealth only office, you're going to not spend quite as much. If you decide that you want to have an in-person office, which is actually what I recommend now in a post-pandemic world, although I think that telehealth is more common, I still think it's a really good idea when you're first starting out to offer clients both in-person or virtual sessions. A lot of times people still want to come in for therapy, and if you're trying to grow a practice and really maximize the amount of clients you appeal to, I would suggest having an office. Now, depending on where you are in the country, if you want a full-time office that's completely your own, you could spend anywhere from like $200 a month in certain parts of the country to $3,000 or $4,000 a month. Let's say you're in New York City. So the range is huge. And this is probably the one that's hardest for me to give you an estimate on, but I wanted to give you some ways you could save money on this. I often suggest when people are first starting out in private practice that you actually sublet the office of another therapist. While you're still getting used to the idea of working in private practice and deciding whether you really want to do this, a lot of therapists will sublet their offices 1 day a week, 2 days a week, or even by the hour. And that can be a really great way to save on cost and can be a great way that for you to prevent having to sign a lease. So I often will tell therapists the benefit of subletting someone's office is that you can get your feet wet without a long-term commitment of an office lease. So that is definitely one way to do it, and that's going to be your first cost, is an office. The next cost you have is malpractice insurance. Malpractice insurance is a non-negotiable. You absolutely need it before you ever see a client. And we can assume that malpractice insurance is going to cost you anywhere between $300 and maybe $600 or $700 a year for a solo therapist in private practice. I currently right now pay about $350 a year. You know, every plan is different and depending on what type of coverage you're gonna get, but I think that's a safe bet, anywhere from like $300 to $500 or $600. The next thing that you are going to have to cover the cost of is your business license fees. This is one we often don't think about, and I go into more depth in my online course, the Private Practice Roadmap, into how to get a business license and when you need one and when you don't and that sort of thing. But In most cities, this costs about $150 a year, and you can plan on budgeting for it. The next thing you want to plan on paying for is a business phone line. Now, sometimes people will use Google Voice, and there are ways to make Google Voice HIPAA compliant. I personally prefer having two separate cell phones, which means that I pay to have an extra phone added to my Verizon bill. That being said, you could do this for free if you wanted to use Google Voice or another service. I like having two separate phones because I treat my work cell phone just like an office phone. I leave it at home when I'm not available on the weekends and that sort of thing. I like having the separation, so you can plan on budgeting for that if that's something that you like. If not, you can use Google Voice for free, but just make sure that you take the steps to make it HIPAA compliant. The other thing that you're gonna need is a HIPAA compliant email. I personally like Hushmail, and the cost can be anywhere between like $50 and $100 a year. I like it because it's already kind of has that HIPAA compliance built, but you can also take the steps to make your Gmail account HIPAA compliant, and then it would be free to have that email address. But I really suggest having a separate work email regardless of what you do and making it HIPAA compliant. Kind of in summary, it could either be free if you decide to go the converting your Gmail account to a HIPAA compliant email account, or it could be anywhere between $50 and $100 a year if you use a paid HIPAA compliant email service. The other thing that you need to make sure you have for your private practice is an electronic health record. An electronic health record honestly is a priceless tool, but they're gonna cost you anywhere between $50 and $150 a month, depending on which electronic health record you pick and the plan that you pick with them. But an electronic health record is gonna help you keep your documentation straight, bill your clients' credit cards, keep records, everything. It is like the hub of your private practice. I personally use Simple Practice. I have a link for 2 months free down below, but make sure whichever electronic health record you have is obviously HIPAA compliant. And I really like when electronic health records have an app that goes along with them so I can bill my clients even if I'm not at the office. That's one thing I like about Simple Practice, but this is another thing that you want to make sure to add to your budget. The next cost that a lot of people don't think about is a website. A website can be anywhere from totally free to thousands and thousands of dollars, right? If you have some beautiful custom made site that cost you $10,000 to $50,000 to build. Usually for therapists who are just starting out, if you're a little bit tech savvy, I actually suggest designing your own Squarespace site. Nowadays, there are so many drag and drop services that allow you to design a site pretty easily and pretty affordably. I think Squarespace or Wix or WordPress ends up being anywhere around $30 a month. So if you're on a budget starting your private practice, that can be a really great way to go. However, I have another video, and I'll link it here, all about what steps you need to take to create a website. And in that video, I go into a more deep dive on how much it costs, number one, and deciding whether or not you're going to DIY it, which would be around $30 a month, or outsource it, which could be a lot more. The next thing you're gonna need related to your website is website hosting. So this usually costs about $5 a month, sometimes more, sometimes less, and you're also going to need a custom domain name. Oftentimes, companies like GoDaddy can do both website hosting and domain names. So those usually cost anywhere between $5 and $10 a month, and is something you want to check out when you're first starting your practice. So believe it or not, those are the basic expenses that you need in order to start a private practice. A lot of times people will tell me, I need to get a $10,000 loan or a $20,000 loan in order to start a practice, and that is just not true. There are ways to start a private practice, whether it's telehealth only, whether it's subletting someone else's office, whether it's doing a DIY website at the beginning, that can be affordable. And one of the biggest mistakes I see therapists make when they first open a private practice is actually spending too much money. As you go through opening a practice and getting clients, you're gonna have more kind of working capital to work with to buy a little bit nicer furniture, right? Or to rent a nicer office. But start out lean, right? Keep your costs down because it's possible. I hope you liked this video. Make sure to download my free startup cost worksheet below so you have this all written out. Please like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.